go with it.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Iryna Zamuruieva. I am a climate resilience manager with the sustainability charity Sniffer. And yes, as you said, I will be speaking to you today about climate justice through the lens of adaptation, and specifically this Routemap that we've produced with the partners that I'll introduce in a couple of minutes. That is a practical guide for communities to adapt to climate change. And very briefly on why are we talking about adaptation even today? I think it may be, many of you may know this, but climate change is obviously happening right now. We know that it's getting more intense and we know it's getting more severe. And even if we cut all of our emissions, say by tomorrow, which is not happening at the moment, there's still a significant degree of change that is locked into the system already. So the question of how we adapt to these changes is absolutely a question of equalities. And how adaptation is a question of equalities is, well, I think the previous two speakers have highlighted it very, very clearly already, that climate change isn't a technical issue. It is very much a political issue that needs unpacking the history of colonialism, of development, and that we know that climate impacts are affecting everyone already, but they're not affecting people and places in the same ways. And people and places that already experience multiple causes of vulnerability are most at risk. So the action that we take as a society, as communities, as individuals, all should consider those who are most affected and least able to adapt, because climate change exacerbates existing inequalities. So yeah, just a bit of a background about Sniffer and Adaptation Scotland. So Sniffer is a sustainability charity that is based in Edinburgh, and we're working across Scotland on transforming people, places, organisations towards flourishing and fairer future for all in a changing climate. And we produced this Routemap as part of our Scottish Government-funded Adaptation Scotland's programme, through which we support communities, organisations, different organizations to adapt to the impacts of climate change. We've not produced it ourselves. We've had a brilliant group of organizations involved in producing this. There was a Highland and Islands Climate Hub collaborating with us on it. There was the Development Trust Association Scotland. There was the Nescan Hub and Scottish Communities Climate Action Network, who have all contributed to making this happen. So it kind of includes the views of many, many people involved in the Scottish climate movement. A little bit about the language, kind of why the route and the map. I suppose with the route, the idea with the route map was that it offers a sense of direction towards a fair and flourishing and well adapting and resilient Scotland and communities inevitably. And a map as in something that gives us a sense of landscape and locating ourselves in this historical moment in time and also in relation to others. And the big idea that the Routemap is based around is, of course, that every community is different, and vulnerability, which in climate change context you can think of as how exposed a place or community is to climate hazard, like flooding, for example, and how sensitive it is to it and how it is able to adapt to it. So every community is different, and every community's capacity to adapt to changes is different. And this Routemap hopefully offers a way to address this issue in a more systematic way, in a way that puts climate justice at the heart of it, and also in a way that allows building solidarities across different struggles that the previous speakers were talking about. It's structured around the 3 stages, and I'm going to briefly speak to them. So the first one is getting started, which is very much about looking around and seeing who else is doing what in the community, in your area. And the key thing here is making connections with others, because we know about the intersectional impacts of climate change. And this is, very much trying not to single out climate change into its own separate issue, but seeing how growing better food locally is and can be also a matter of being more adapted to the impacts of climate change, how improving well-being, health, public transport also can be very much connected to coping with the impacts of climate change, rather than kind of seeing as its own separate thing. So the Routemap contains guiding questions that you can ask at this stage links to resources, groups that are already working in this direction. The second and a bit more substantial stage is about understanding climate change in your community. As I said, yeah, climate change is here to stay. It is getting worse, and building long-term resilience, especially with those who are already vulnerable, is, yeah, absolutely essential. So it offers, yeah, very simple definitions of climate change resilience and also climate change adaptation, and offers ways of seeing, first of all, climate change impacts for Scotland, because there is kind of key trends that have been identified through Adaptation Scotland, working with the Scottish government, such as we know that the average temperature will increase across seasons. We know that summers will be warmer and dry. We know that winters will be warmer and wetter, etc. I'm not going to bore you with any graphs, but there's a lot of information that we know that this will be already happening. There, kind of, you know, in one of the important things that we offer in this Routemap is methods, tools, approaches to think about, okay, there's the Scotland-wide changes, there's worldwide changes that are happening. What does this mean for the place where we live in our community? And methods to open up that conversation, to talk about what these impacts mean for different people in different neighborhoods. So, for example, there is signposting to a place standard tool that we've also worked together with partners that allows to look at a place specifically with climate change lens, where you look around and think, okay, how our public spaces are adapted, how our provision of public transport is adapted or not adapted to climate change, and kind of, yeah, as a way to have a more structured conversation about climate change. I'm not going to go through in detail through all of this. I'll post a link to this later, but yeah, there's lots of tools to help have a conversation of localizing climate change impacts for also different groups in the community. There's also signpostings to resources produced by others trying to kind of think about climate change more broadly, such as MEN's webinar, thinking about what Black and minority ethnic Muslim organizations are doing across the UK and in Scotland, also specifically to tackle climate change, because quite often there are activities that can be very much addressing climate change impacts, but they're not necessarily being labeled as such or perceived as such. And it's really important to see kind of beyond those titles and headers what these activities call themselves, and work with people and connect on the issues. There's in this stage also helpful tables to structure the understanding of who and what needs to be protected in the area. So thinking about what things are affected. For example, if your organization or community groups owns land or buildings or provides specific services or activities, thinking about who's vulnerable to those, how they affect it now, but also in the future, because what we see now is maybe a signifier of what is to come in 5, 10, 20 years time, but it also may be something entirely different that is coming. And also prompts to think about whether these risks are being addressed already, because some of the local authorities have kind of taken this climate change, climate emergency agenda very seriously. There have been precedents of local authorities setting up specific grants to help communities adapt to the impacts of climate change, but the degree of that activity is varied across Scotland. It also includes signposting to all of the climate contexts across local authorities that you can also link to, and even ask your local authority to check what is it that they're doing to adapt to the impacts of climate change, because local authorities in Scotland do have a statutory duty to address the impacts of climate change, and many of them are already doing this. And the third section of the Routemap is on taking action. So this is where we've, together with those 4 organizations with whom we've produced the Routemap, collaborated on this list that is in no way exhaustive of different actions that can be taken to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And they are structured by 5 themes. So regenerate nature, improve housing and neighborhoods, supporting self-sufficiency, getting around, growing skills and employment, as very much a way also not to kind of say, oh, here are separate climate change adaptation issues. No, this is very much about seeing how by doing these different activities under these themes, we can also address the impacts of climate change. And just going back to the previous slide for a second, each of the actions is structured alongside these 5 themes, but also each of them has the icon that you see on the right. So you can see, okay, if your organization or community group, for example, already knows what are the impacts that you're dealing with, what are the ones that you think will be happening more in your area, you can skip to this section and then think, okay, if flooding and coastal hazards are the biggest ones for us, you can just check this icon and see the actions that are most relevant to your place or your community. And I'm just going to show you a small example. So this is the first page of the Regenerate Nature section, in which one of the 3 actions is one on working with local landowners to improve the way that land is managed, because we know that a lot of the way that land is managed in Scotland has very significant impacts on how we are adapted or non-adapted to climate change. And we can think about vulnerabilities here and equalities. I think this is where it comes to life in a very strong way. We know that there are a lot of people in Scotland who have their houses built in floodplains, which means they're at more risk of flooding, which means there's often complications with insurances, which means that overall these houses are sold at a cheaper price than those that are not in the floodplains. We know that there is no proper flood disclosure. So, for example, when you are a developer selling houses, you do not need currently to disclose whether the house is being sold is in the floodplain or is it flood risk or not. So it's very complicated from perspective of someone who is thinking of buying home to figure those out. There's SEPA, so Scottish Environmental Protection Agency's flood maps, but you need to do quite a lot of work and actually think about it a lot. So as a voluntary organization, as a community organization, you can work with people in your area in making sure that, for example, people know whether they do live in floodplains or not in the first place. So there's a lot of these kind of very simple things that can be done to kind of get things started, but there's layers of depth, of course, to where you can go once you've kind of done the groundwork of kind of building the awareness of what the impacts are and how they're relevant to different people in the area. So there's these kind of sections for each of those 5 themes. There's the Routemap has been designed specifically with thinking it can be used by a very small community organization where you have 1 or 2 volunteers, like without any paid staff, all the way to kind of more set up development trusts who may own land or buildings and have paid staff to address different things. But it's also relevant to community councils, resident groups, all sorts of organizations who are thinking about how to address climate change locally and how to specifically think about how to address climate change in a fair and just way that does not make the existing inequalities worse. There's also a poster through which you can interact with this Routemap, kind of, so it summarizes everything that we just talked about in a poster, and a little kind of algorithm at the bottom of the routes that can take you, depending on where you are, what your priorities are, what your themes are, to the relevant actions and relevant sections of the Routemap. These are just a couple of screenshots from the Routemap, and I can share a link to it later on into the chat. There is obviously no one size fits all, and we produced it very much with the thought of this opening up a conversation about what matters locally, how can we connect climate change organizing with other like migrant actions, land right campaigns and others, food sovereignty, and also thinking about how can we address immediate needs and practical questions while also focusing on these long-term strategic things that need to be happening. I think that is me. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me directly. I'll post a link into the chat. We've had a few of the in-person workshops on this Routemap that we could also come and do. So just give me a shout if this resonates, or if you want to learn more, if something is confusing, or anything. I'm here to answer your questions. Thank you.